much for joining us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I am the founder and managing partner of Scott Legal. So today we are going to talk about EB-5 investment options, and we're going to talk about them in the context of both regional centers and direct investment. Before we start, we will tell you a little bit about the firm. We are a full-service immigration law firm. We do a number of investor visas, including EB-5 visas, both for direct investors and people who want to invest in regional centers. And we also do a lot of E2 visas and generally a lot of employment-based visas. But we do have attorneys as well that specialize in family-based immigration and humanitarian-based immigration. So really a full-service immigration firm. In terms of the webinar today, we are going to go over a number of slides. And then after the presentation, we are going to send you a number of different things. So we'll send you the PowerPoint presentation. We'll also send you an EB-5 guide, which you can utilize to gain more information. Some of that information is going to be very similar to what we go through today, but just maybe a little bit more detail. And we also will send you a link to this recording. And you will find that this recording is posted on our YouTube channel. So we do encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you will get updates related to this webinar and also future webinars. So if you hit the notification button, then you will also be notified of other webinars that we have in the future. And we do webinars, usually a couple every week, on different immigration topics. So a lot of great information there. If you do have questions, you can add your questions to the chat box or the Q&A. We will get to all questions, and so definitely happy to field any questions that people have. So before we get into the details of the EB-5 program, let's just talk about the difference between a regional center and a direct EB-5 investment. And we'll talk about them maybe in the context of what type of investor usually invests in each of these. So generally speaking, if someone is investing in a regional center, that's going to be something like, let's say that there's a large hotel chain that wants to start operations in the US, and they want to attract investment from a number of different people. So they register through the EB-5 program, collect investment, create the jobs, and then a lot of clients can utilize that to get the green card. Now, generally, that is something that is beneficial or usually is sought out by a fairly passive investor, someone who just wants to put the money into a place and have someone else do all the work. They don't want to create US jobs. They just want to invest and sit back and ultimately receive the green card. The administration fees for this are usually quite high because the regional center has a lot of overhead. So usually they're $35,000 to $50,000. So that is something that you have to keep in mind if, in fact, you want to do a regional center. The regional center, what you're typically getting is limited partnership units, and the risk is like any other investment. So it's like investing in the stock market, et cetera. In fact, that the project cannot have a guaranteed return. So the idea here is that you would invest, and the project, you have full risk of loss. If the project went under or something like that, then you would unfortunately not get the green card, and you would not get your money back. The other benefit of regional centers is that when we talk about the job creation requirement, regional centers can count indirect jobs. And what indirect jobs are let's say that the hotel that I just used as an example is being developed and constructed. And then you can also count other jobs that are related to that. Like, let's say that because of that, there's going to be a restaurant down the street or a dry cleaner down the street, or so other knock-on jobs that maybe are not people who directly work for the hotel, but jobs that are created as a result of the hotel actually opening. And again, this particular category, it really is looking at people who just want the green card, right? They're not investing for the return. The return actually is usually negative return when you take into account the administration fee. The direct investment, on the other hand, is someone who really wants to control their own destiny. They want control over the hiring process, the money, obviously potential for higher return. And for this, so only direct jobs can be counted. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the other benefit of this particular area of direct investment is the program is not subject to reauthorization. The regional center program is. So you saw a couple of years ago that there were issues when the program didn't get reauthorized, and there were people left in limbo for quite a period of time. A lot of the time you see people moving from an E2 visa to EB-5 direct, where they are utilizing their E2 business as the business to get the EB-5 green card. So that's often something that we see, and we do help a lot of our clients move from an E2 visa to a green card. So now let's look at the actual EB-5 requirements. So they're really broken up into two big areas, right? So one is investment and the other one is job creation. So in terms of the investment, you're required to invest either 800,000 or 1,050,000 in a new commercial enterprise. So that's a business that was started after 1990 rather. And the difference between the 800,000 and the 1,050,000 really relates to whether or not the particular company is located in a targeted employment area. So that's either going to be an area where the unemployment rate is 1.5 times the national average, or an area that is designated as a rural area. So if it is 800,000, if it's not, 1,050,000. But that has pretty significant implications as well, something that we're going to talk about a little later, the carve-outs, in particular if you were born in India or China. So you always want to be investing in the $800,000 areas, generally speaking, unless it's an infrastructure project. But the investment can be made over time. So that's, if someone was had an E2, we just did an EB-5 for someone who had an E2 for many years and invested hundreds of thousands of dollars over a period of a number of years. So when they got to the 800,000, we were able to apply for the EB-5 green card for them. Not all money spent can be included in the investment. So EB-5 is quite specific that you can't use the investment funds on administration fees. So even the regional center administration fee or the lawyer fees, you shouldn't be using any of that. To the 800,000 or 1,050,000 would have to be separate and distinct from that. And the other thing, especially if you're looking at direct investment, if you have an E2 visa, for example, and your E2 visa, let's just take an example that the E2 business made $2 million in net income, and then that was all in your retained earnings, and then the next year you spent that $2 million, then that is not going to be considered an investment. Investment, you have to be in possession and control of the funds outside of the company and then invest in the company. The big differences between E2 and EB-5, E2 has obviously a nationality requirement, a country of citizenship. So if you have a passport, you can get an E2. A passport for certain countries, about 80 of them, you can get an E2. The source of funds is very, very different, although on paper they look like a similar requirement. The source of funds requirement for EB-5 is quite extensive. So it's they really treat it more like an audit than just a review of the legitimacy of the fund. So that's another big difference. E2 doesn't have a specific dollar value that you have to invest, where EB-5 does. We just went over that, 800,000 or 1,050,000. And also jobs. E2 doesn't have a specific number of jobs that have to be created, but we're going to come to the jobs that have to be created under EB-5. So, again, source of funds, just think of EB-5 is not for the faint of heart, because, the analysis is really like an audit, and the government just keeps on asking for more and more information. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to undertake EB-5. And the investment does have to be an equity investment. You can't, for example, loan money to an entity and then utilize that for EB-5 investment. So now we come to the second big piece, jobs, and the EB-5 requires that you create 10 full-time jobs. So not part-time jobs, they have to be full-time jobs. The direct or indirect is going to be depending on whether or not it's a direct EB-5 program or regional center, because when it's a regional center, they get an economist to write a report that shows all of the indirect jobs that are going to be created. So That certainly is a benefit of the regional center. The jobs also have to be U.S. citizens or green card holders. So it is important to register for E-Verify if you are doing a direct investment in particular, because the government will check to make sure that each and every person that you indicate is going to be an employee. Each and every person actually is a person that is permitted to work in the United States through citizenship or a green card. If it is a direct investment, you're going to require a very detailed business plan. Even regional centers have detailed business plans. And keep in mind that the money for the EB-5 investment has to be linked to job creation. So this becomes important in particular. We see situations where people want to buy an existing business. And if you buy an existing business and give the money to the seller, that is not going to qualify. The investment amount is not going to qualify for EB-5 because the money went to the seller. It didn't have anything to do with job creation. It just went to the seller. So in order to have the money count towards investment, you would have to actually invest. If you're investing in a particular entity or company, you'd have to put the money in that entity and then utilize that entity for job creation things like whether it's actually paying employees, whether it's equipment, whether it's lease, other things that are all looking at creating U.S. jobs. And again, you just have to make sure that the people are full-time and that they are qualified workers. The forms that are completed for EB-5 are the forms you see listed on the slide, the I-526 petition or I-526E if you are a regional center. And one great thing is that the category is current, which it is for most countries. You can file the I-485 if you're in the United States concurrently now. And the category is current for all countries in certain, if you're investing under the $800,000 criteria because of the new carve-outs that came. We're going to talk about those a little more in future slides. But the great thing about filing the I-485 petition is that you can actually file the I-485 petition and you can file a work authorization and travel authorization document so that you're able to actually work in the United States, and after about 9 months, you'll be able to go back and forth travel as well. So that's very, very helpful. And then if you are outside of the United States, then you have your I-526 has to be approved, and then you file for consular processing. Then once you have the green card, 2 years after you have the green card, you have to go back to the government and file another petition called an I-829 petition. And that I-829 petition is removing the conditions. So it's showing that you actually were able to create the 10 US jobs that are in the requirement. So a few key changes to the program. When I say changes, these all occurred in March of 2022 when the regional center program was reauthorized. And big change was the investment amount. It used to be $500,000 for the targeted employment area, and now it's 800,000. Not much of a change on the higher end. It used to be $1 million, now it's $1,050,000. The other good thing is it's reauthorized until 2027, but they made it explicit that they are going to be able to adjudicate petitions as long as they're filed before September 30th, 2026, which is great because last time there was confusion and a lot of people were left in limbo, so it really created a significant amount of difficulty. So that has been eliminated. The target employment areas, they changed to the rules, which make it a bit more difficult to get them. Before, you have targeted employment areas in downtown Manhattan, and the reason was because they could link census tracts together and link them right up through areas that had higher unemployment, and it was a mechanism that you were able to still qualify. But these areas that qualified were some of the richest areas in the country. So but that's been eliminated. So only the government can now designate what TEA is. And then we talked a little bit about this earlier, these set-asides. 32% of the visas are set aside for specific types of projects. So high unemployment and rural areas are 30%. And those are the same definitions as we used before. So high unemployment is 1.5 times the national average if the business is located, and then rural area is going to be defined by the local jurisdiction, what's considered rural, like a number of inhabitants that live in that particular place, and then 2% for infrastructure projects. So I talked about this already, great thing now is that the I-485 can be filed concurrently, and that was a change because before March of 2022, that wasn't the case. The other big change is that the source of funds, you have to actually show that even though the administration fees and the legal fees are not part of your investment, you do have to show where you got the money from, the same way you have to show where you got the rest of the money from. And then they also clarified for loans, loans can be unsecured, that's not a problem. And gifts, they were trying to implement something that said that the gifts can only be from immediate family members, but that didn't get very far. So the gift can really be from anyone. Just want to make sure that the person, if they do give you a gift, that they have paid the gift tax in their local jurisdiction. And then there's some new provisions that allow to some relief if the person, if the regional center fails through no fault of the individual. Some other things to consider for EB-5 is that, you can't, if you do a direct investment, for example, you can't just put the $800,000 in a bank account. You do have to show commitments, and when you do want to show the commitments, and so it could be rent, it could be employees, could be anything like that, showing that you are going to spend the money or that you've already spent it. And we talked about loans and gifts already. And similarly, we talked about considerations for purchasing a business. It's not like an E2. An E2 will permit you to, if someone says, okay, I want to buy a restaurant, and they spend like, $500,000 on buying a restaurant, and then they, get an E2. That's not a problem for an E2. But for EB-5, the money invested has to link to job creation. So if you give that money to the seller, it's not going to count towards the investment. So you could still buy that and still use it for EB-5, but you'd have to invest another $800,000 or $1,050,000 into the business, and then use that money to create jobs. And similarly, the employees that are there on day one wouldn't count towards the 10 employees that have to be hired. No requirement with respect to how much you have to own. It can be fractional percentage, nothing at all. And you just have to make sure that you're, that there are no guarantees, right? That you guarantee return on investment, guarantee the ability to sell the shares and get your money back. None of that can actually occur. Then moving from E2 to EB-5, E2 to EB-5, again, I think we talked about most of these things that you have to look at what was invested, because things that can count for investment for E2 can't count for EB-5. And then, jobs that were created for E2 may not qualify because, as I said, the jobs have to be US citizens or green card holders. So. Okay, so let's go through a quick example here to illustrate some of the points that I talked about. So we have here that Helen, she got an E2, and she got an E2 in 2015, and she purchased a business for $300,000. So she gave the money to the seller. The business had 5 full-time employees, and she paid $40,000 in lawyer fees, right? At the end of 2019, she took another $500,000 that was given to her as a gift. The person who gave her the gift got the money for the sale of property. And the person, instead of giving the money to Helen, the person invested the money directly, put the money directly into Helen's business bank account. And by that time, she had 10 employees, so 5 and 5. And at the end of 2019, she also paid herself a bonus of $100,000 after the company made $1 million. She applied for the EB-5 and said, this is going to be a slam dunk. I've invested already 1.8, the 300 initially, the 500 that was gifted, and then the 1 million in retained earnings. And she already has 10 full-time employees, so she's good to go, and she doesn't really want to hire anybody else. So what are the issues here? So first, the $300,000 doesn't count towards the investment because she paid that to the seller, right? And so the same thing, any money she paid in legal fees is not going to count towards the investment. Now, in 2019, a few issues with the money that came in. So one, the person who gave the gift, it doesn't matter that it came through inheritance. We still need source of funds documentation, and it doesn't matter that it was 15 years ago. The government wants to see where the person who passed away got the money from. And also the other big issue with this, it would be dead on arrival, is that the money went, instead of going to Helen, it went directly into the business bank account, which is a problem. The money has to be in possession and control of the investors. In the past, USCIS would deny petitions where parents, for example, would invest in regional centers, and they would send the money directly to the regional center instead of giving it to the child first. Maybe they were afraid the child was going to spend it or something. But that was, that was fatal for the petition because the child didn't ever have possession and control of the funds. So that's a big problem here as well. And then the employees, keep in mind that the money that was invested, 300,000 was invested, doesn't count towards the investment. So and the 5 employees that were there at the beginning don't count, and there hasn't been any additional investment made. So none of the employees count here because the 500,000 presumably wouldn't count either because it wasn't given to Helen. And then retained earnings, of course, doesn't count. So the $1 million that was made doesn't count. The other thing to keep in mind is Helen paid herself a bonus of $100,000. You have to be very careful if your investment amount is a certain number. Like let's say, invested $800,000 and then the company didn't make much money and then you paid yourself $100,000. That can be a problem. If the company didn't make any money, that can be a problem. So you have to, because you can't just invest the money and then pay it out to yourself, right? So those are all issues with this, and and they're all things that definitely come up. In this case, she's in an area where the unemployment rate is 7%, so it does qualify as a targeted employment area, given the unemployment rate right now is 4.2%. So 1.5 times the national average isn't 7. So timing considerations, EB-5 petitions take a long time to be approved. Rural petitions are being approved quickly. They're being approved within a 6-month period. There is some kind of approval that the regional center has to have for this, but they can be approved in a 6-month period. But if not, it's going to take 4 to 5 years for the petition to be approved. And we talked about the carve-outs and the country-specific quotas, because if you don't, one of the reasons the country-specific quotas and the carve-outs are important is because if you're from India or China and you invest in a program that's $1 million, then you're out of luck because there are long waits, so you won't be able to file the I-485, and there are long waits generally. So you do have to, if you're in the United States on a particular visa, you just have to make sure that you are navigating their travel considerations, and make sure that if you are on a visa, that you are on a visa that allows you to kind of be there, and taking into account if you do have to leave the US, that the visa maybe has dual intent. So that like if you were here on H-1B and you had I-526 pending, you could probably leave the US and re-enter without an issue. And then we do see a lot of parallel green card strategies. Given the length of time the EB-5 program takes to be adjudicated, we see a lot of people actually doing marriage-based petitions, and during that process, they meet a US citizen and do a marriage-based petition. So, but planning is really the key. So that was really all the prepared remarks that I had to go through. Definitely, if you have, I'm looking and don't see any questions, but if you have, if you'd like to assess your case, definitely feel free to set up a consultation. That's another thing that we will send you in addition to all of the items that I mentioned that we would send earlier. But we'd be happy to set up a consultation and kind of walk through your source of funds, or walk through any specific questions that you have as well, to help you through this process. I'm just taking another look here, and still no questions. So yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to hearing from you. Take care.